Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the GAA Lean Body Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Keane, strength and conditioning coach and sports nutritionist, here to help you with all things GAA related fitness. Today's podcast is hopefully something that will be very useful regardless of what time of the year you're listening to it, but I'm recording it and releasing it for January 10th. So a week before my upcoming GAA Lean Body program starts. And I know there's a good few of you who are already signed up and ready for that. Some of you listening to this on the back end will be coming into an upcoming program, I'm sure. And others who are doing your own thing. You're designing your own training program. You're doing your own off-season or pre-season plan in this case. And hopefully, for those of you in that bracket, and for those of you who just want to educate yourself in terms of how to create a good training program for yourself, we'll get a lot of value in today's podcast. So we're going to talk about how to create your own training program, the goal setting, the program creation itself, and adapting versus optimizing phases. So the first thing when it comes to creating your own training program for GAA is getting clear on the goals. And I normally get players, either ones I'm working with or ones that are listening to this podcast or are following me on social media, is to ask two questions first and foremost. One, what's your primary goal? And then two, what are your secondary goals? And you can have multiple primary goals or multiple secondary goals. I know that sounds counterintuitive. Normally primary means pick one thing, but normally it's the order of importance. So with players that I work with, and I'll use my program as an example here, but you might have secondary goals that fall outside of this. Primary goals for a lot of people will be to get fitter, stronger, faster. Secondary goals will be to build muscle and lose body fat. Or in the flip order, January, overindulged at Christmas, particularly for those listening at the time of recording, you might have a primary goal to get body fat down, building lean muscle tissue, some body composition style goals that are actually primary goals for you at the minute. And then secondary, you want to get stronger, fitter, faster so that you can improve for the season ahead. First thing you need to establish is, okay, what are my goals that I'm working towards? And you can have a whole host of potential primary or secondary goals. Some can be injury prevention. So a lot of your program and your plan would have direct work that is kind of sports specific for ankle mobility, for adductors, for glute activation. Things that work purely, or not purely, but largely for injury prevention. You might also have secondary endurance goals. You might want to run a 5K or a 10K in a specific time or a personal best time. Or you might want to do an endurance event with kayaks and bikes and running. You might have secondary goals, and depending on the time of the year, you might be flipping this. But you need to establish first and foremost, well, what is it I'm looking to get out of my training program? What are the things I want to do? Because then it becomes a little bit of a juggling act in terms of how you pair things and how you combine things. One of the best and biggest advantages of working with a coach or working on a program, and this could be me or it could be another coach or another trainer, is you're cutting your learning curve massively with that coach or trainer by coming through their program, because it's all been worked out for you. When you are designing it yourself, which is where you might be listening to this podcast, you do need to give yourself a longer runway of time, because there's a trial and error period to see what your body responds well to. The downside of putting it together yourself, although there's a lot of upsides too, limited cost, self-education, etc. But the downside is you probably will fall more often than not, i.e. you will go off plan unintentionally because something will happen. You'll get an injury, you'll become overtrained, you'll become under-recovered, and a whole host of potential issues could happen. But once you are using that trial and error for yourself and you're checking back in with, well, how am I feeling? How is my body recovering? Am I moving closer towards my goal? Am I building muscle? Am I losing body fat? Am I getting stronger? Am I getting fitter? Am I getting faster? And you're checking back in with that every 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, and you're then using that trial and error approach, you won't go too far wrong. But before you do any of that, and before we get into the length of a training cycle or phase, the sets, the reps, the tempo, you need to establish what the goals are. Because if you have one person or an athlete who comes and says, I just want to get stronger, that's the only goal I have, that program is going to be completely different or largely different from somebody who's like, I want to build muscle, or I need to get body fat down and I want to get faster. The goals are going to be different and the program you design are going to be different. I will give you examples and some samples of plans as we go through, but establish your goals first and foremost. The next thing then is how you build out that plan. So once you've got the goal, we now go into reverse engineering mode, meaning that we're working backwards with the end in mind. So with the training program, you always want to start with the end in mind. What's the end goal? What's the thing you're looking to do? And then we reverse back the creation of the program around that. So how many times a week can you train would be one question that will come in here, because if you are only going to the gym twice a week potentially and only training maybe once or twice outside of that, you're probably going to look at something like a full body plan, probably based around compound lifts, squats, deadlift, bench press, military press, etc. If you're training multiple times a week, you're going to be able to split that, and you're going to be able to break up your workouts and hit multiple body parts on a different day. Or if you're coming through a program like mine, you're probably going to work off a best practice 5-day split where you're working on the pitch twice a week, and then you're in the gym 3 times a week, and you're rotating session 1, 2, 3, 4 on phase 1 on alternate weeks, meaning you're doing session 1, 2, and 3 this week, 4, 5, 1 the next week, etc., etc. That's how I design it for a lot of my programs or my players, as different programs, but in terms of the split for the week, that's the way we design it. So ask yourself, how many times a week can you train? And then you'll feed back into, okay, don't go into overtraining. And I covered a previous podcast on acute fatigue all the way to OTS, which is overtraining spectrum. So you're checking back in to find your sweet spot. How many sessions per week can you do? Some players will do less than those 5 days I talked about, and some of my players will do more than those 5 days, particularly my very highly nutritionally and recover dialed in athletes who have really prioritized their nutrition and recovery. They're going to be able to train more. And as a result of that, especially if they're in an adaptation or in an optimizing phase, which I'll come back to later, versus an adaptation phase, i.e. a brand new training program, they're going to be able to do more during the week and not have any negative impact. You also then want to ask, well, what's the length of your cycle of training phase? I normally recommend every 6 weeks or so changing up your training. But you don't have to reinvent the wheel every 6 weeks, just changing something up in your program. So one thing that I do that works really well with my athletes is I work off my GAA Lean Body program with a 2-phase plan. So 6 weeks is on phase 1, working directly with me and coaching with me. Do we make changes to the nutrition, to the training, etc.? Then phase 2 is self-sufficient, meaning that you follow it yourself with the new training program. And then after 6 weeks, again, you rotate back onto phase 1. And then during your season, you adapt the sessions depending on how many pitch sessions and games you have. So somebody in the off season or preseason might be able to do 4 or 5 sessions per week from the training program for the gym, home workouts, S&C, bodyweight, etc., depending on the version of the program you're on. But then in the middle of the year, they might only do 1 or 2 of those sessions because they become maintenance. It becomes into optimization at that point. You're not adapting to a new training phase. You're not doing anything new. Your body's already familiar with the load, familiar with the movements. You're just going in, hitting a specific weight, loading your muscle under a specific plan so that you can keep that maintenance, that strength you've built, or that muscle you've built, or that speed you've built, or a combination of all 3, and you're maintaining that through the year. After that, then, you'll look at your sets, your rest, your tempo. These are the basic makeups of any training program, whether your goal is strength and conditioning or body composition or anything in between. So your sets, how many sets you're doing, your rest, what's your rest period between exercise choices, and then your tempo, so how you're performing the movement. So are you going with slow negatives, so something like a 4-second negative on a squat, and then maybe a 1 second of explosive positives. You're adjusting tempos, sets, and rest based on the goal. If you're following a strict strength program, your sets and rests are going to look different, and your repetitions are going to look different. You're going to have lower repetitions, probably 4 reps, 5 reps, 6 reps. Your sets are probably going to be higher. They're in that 4 to 5 set rep range, and your resting could be anywhere from 90 seconds to 3 or 4 minutes between sets. If you're on a phase where you're trying to get fitter and you're trying to get body fat down, you're going to reduce that. You're going to have higher repetitions, probably 8, 10, 12, 15 reps, maybe a little bit higher in some cases. Your sets will be probably 2, 3, 4, and then your rest will be 60 to 90 seconds. And then you're adjusting that depending on what you're looking to do. So that's how you'll design back your program. If it's strength phase, you're going to be going heavier with longer rest. If it's hypertrophy, you're going to be in between, where you're going with that 60 to 90 second rest, 8 to 10, 8 to 12 reps. And then if you're working for a circuit style workout or plyometrics, you're probably going with moves and exercises that are back to back. So a box jump followed by a spider push up followed by a tuck jump potentially. After that, then you're looking at your recovery methods that you're going to use to support that. Sometimes, and I definitely have fallen victim to this in the past as a professional, we can put so much emphasis on the training side, and training is important, don't get me wrong. if you're not training and not doing the gym work, you won't get the physical responses and performance gains on the pitch. But recovery is something that when you elevate it to the point where this becomes a major priority, i.e. your sleep, nutrition, supplementation, active recovery, it's going to further support that training. With GAA, football, hurling, ladies football, camogie, when you start to see yourself as an athlete, you always want to work off the stress-rest response, meaning that you stress yourself quite hard, whether it's in the gym, on the pitch, in a game, and then you rest. So your sleep, your nutrition, your supplementation, your active recovery, you're in that stress-rest response. Training way too much will lead to OTS, overtraining syndrome, where you're getting all these negative impacts from low energy, poor performance, low sex drive, poor sleep, excessive cortisol, stress hormone, etc. If you rest too much, you don't get any of the performance gains. You won't get fitter, you won't get stronger, you won't get faster, you won't build muscle, you won't lose body fat, you won't get any of these other benefits. So you're looking for this kind of Goldilocks zone in between from that stress-rest response. And everyone has individual tolerances and variabilities based on their nutrition, based on their training, based on genetics, etc. But you are looking at your core recovery methods, your nutrition and your sleep being the two. I got a great quote sent to me recently on Instagram where somebody said that nutrition and sleep are the foundation of the recovery, something I've preached before, but they talked about active recovery, foam rolling, trigger point, sauna, ice baths as the cherry on top. But if you don't look after your sleep and you don't look after your nutrition, you don't have any cake to put that cherry on top of. So you always want to make sure that you're doing the right things first. A less politically correct way of saying this is looking at active recovery and supplementation before sleep and recovery is like wiping your arse before you take a shit. The order matters a great deal, and that's effectively how supplementation and active recovery strategies work. If you're doing them without looking at sleep and nutrition, you're not going to get the performance benefits that you want. But if you flip the order and do it correctly, it's like, wiping your arse after you've taken a shit. You get all the benefits from it, and it's considerably less heartache. So that's how I would look at it. What's your nutritional plan? How are you eating to fuel this training program and this plan that you're on? How is your sleep quality? Do you need 7, 8, 9, 10 hours plus per night? Again, really varies depending on your training phase and where you're at. When I go into heavy training phases where I'm doing 2-a-day splits, I normally need 9.5, 10 hours that night to try and recover, and sometimes the night after. And then when I'm on a deload or a taper week, I get away with about 7.5 hours and I feel the exact same. I feel recovered on both. So it does change. Your sleep doesn't always stay the same. Your requirements will change based on what you're doing. But look at your sleep quality, look at your food choices, and then add in the marginal gains, the supplementation, your protein shakes, potentially glutamine or amino acids, your active recovery, myofascial release, trigger point, cryotherapy, ice baths, heat exposure, Epsom salts, magnesium gels. All of these things can help, but they bring you from a 9 to a 10. They don't get you from a 1 to a 9. That's what your sleep and your nutrition does. After that, and this is something that is very important for a lot of GAA players to know, and most of you will have done this by accident without necessarily knowing what the name of it was, and that's adapting versus optimizing. So I'll give you an example that even the beginner will understand, because we've all experienced this as someone who plays sport. Adapting is when you've changed up a new training program. So let's use the pitch as an example. When you go back on the pitch in January or February after a month, 2 month, 3 month break, your body goes back into adaptation mode. You haven't done sprints, you haven't done any drills, you haven't done anything in as complex as the movement patterns in GAA for the previous month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks potentially. So that puts you into an adaptation phase. Your body is now becoming adapted to the new training phase. And then after about 6 weeks, 8 weeks of doing this, you go automatically into optimizing. You've got your base level of fitness up. You've got your base level of skill work up. And now it's into optimizing. How do you improve performance? You're not worried anymore, assuming you've no injury, about your basic fitness levels. You're not worried about the basic skill work. You've spent 6-8 weeks in the preseason working through all of those kinks. So everyone has experienced this, whether they know it or not. Where it's important to understand is your training phase within the gym workouts that you're doing. Because if you are adapting, your ability to withstand excessive work or load goes down during this adaptation phase. So let's say, for example, you're about to start a new program. My GAA Lean Body program, a program you've created for yourself, a program another coach has given you. Your body's now in adaptation phase with that program. You haven't done those movement patterns before, and if you have, you haven't done them in the order, potentially with the rep ranges and the entire way the program is designed. A 4-day split, 5-day split. It's all new to you. You haven't done it in the past. So adaptation means that your body is under more stress for those several weeks until it becomes adapted. So that's why it's so important to look at your sleep and your nutrition during this period of time. Because what happens with players sometimes is when they go into an adaptation phase and they try and do too much too soon, their body ends up kicking back. So it either manifests itself in you getting sick or run down or injured in the worst case scenario. You've pushed it too much. Your body has said, nope, we're not going any further. We're not doing any more in this. You've pushed us too far. We're going to break, and that's what's going to make you stop. And that's why in the initial phases of a program, you have to be careful. And I would never increase training load without looking at the recovery methods that go alongside it, because they basically work hand in hand. However, when you're in an optimization phase or an optimizing phase of a program, you have way more flexibility with what you do. So let's say, for example, you're in the middle of a season. You've been training a couple of times a week on the pitch. You've played 6-7 games at this point. Your body's well optimized for that specific part of the game. The pitch sessions, the training, the drills, the cutting, the twisting, the turning, the shooting, the skill work, all of that. You're in an optimization phase for the most part. You could then add in a potential training program on top of that, and you wouldn't have to worry too much because you're not changing up too many things too soon. Where players make mistakes is when they go into the new season in the preseason and they try and do everything without evaluating how long or how this will impact you in several months' time. So in January, and this is something I'm doing with my players currently, is we're making sure those who are back on the pitch early, because some are back on the pitch early because of the way the league falls in certain counties. Some are back on the pitch early. Some of the those involved in the inter-county setup are back on the pitch already doing their sessions. So we have to look at their training, or I have to look at their training and think, right, we need to scale this part of the training back because you're doing too much too soon after a Christmas period. So if you go, think of it like trying to go from 0 to 100 miles an hour in a car. You could do that, but if your car isn't a Ferrari or a Lamborghini or a car that's been designed to do that, it could break down very quickly if you have an old Toyota. That's effectively how your body is. The more fit the athlete, the more elite the athlete, the more they can add in and the faster they can go at a shorter period of time and do it in a very efficient manner. Somebody who hasn't been training and doesn't live like an elite athlete has to be more careful of this. It's like driving a Toyota versus driving a Lamborghini or a Ferrari. So what you would have a thing to look out for now is joining a gym, doing 5 days a week in the gym, and then going onto the pitch 2 or 3 other days in the session, doing a total of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 potential sessions per week when you haven't done anything for the previous 6 or 7 weeks. That's the recipe where people get injured. That's the recipe where people burn out. That's the recipe for people either having an acute short-term relapse where they, as I mentioned, get injured or they get sick, etc., or it pushes the ball or kicks the tire down the line for 3 months' time when you get a pretty bad injury because you went way too hard, way too soon within January. So with this time of year and all the way through the season, to be honest, with the exception of off-season, you always want to be in this Goldilocks zone. How much training are you doing? How much and how well is your recovery with your nutrition, your sleep, your supplementation, your active recovery, and you're trying to balance this entire thing throughout the season. So you have more luxury or more flexibility, within an optimization phase, something that you've been doing for quite a while, than an adaptation phase. So hopefully I haven't confused you on that, because it's important to understand that when you do too much too soon, your body will rebel back. But if you've been doing a gym program for the last 6 weeks, 8 weeks, it's very easy to add in new movements, new exercises, or pitch sessions, new drills, extra drills, because your body's already in that condition for it. So depending on where you fall right now, just be mindful of that. Partly because sometimes on this podcast and some of my other content, I put up a lot of workouts, a lot of things on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube for you to try. And then if you end up doing too much too soon, I don't want you to get the negative impact of that without the context. If you're not working with me or you're not working with another coach, it's easy to do too much and then feel the negative impacts or negative effects of it. And then after that, you're looking at some basic essentials to include. And with the training program, you always want to make sure that you're doing it specific to your goals. So if you're trying to get fitter, faster, stronger, build muscle, etc., your program and your exercise choice will reflect that. However, there are some basic essentials to include. First thing is compound lifts. Nearly every program, regardless of the goals I've mentioned, will include compounds: military press, bench press, pull up or a row, some version of a deadlift, probably a trap bar deadlift if you're a GAA player. You're going to have those movements in there. Your rep ranges will obviously vary depending on whether it's strength or whether it's hypertrophy or whether it's something else, which we talked about earlier. You'll also have some form of plyometrics in there. So box jumps or single leg jumps or ice skaters, something that is plyometric. You're exploding up from a start position to a finish position. Lateral movements. So going from side to side in some capacity. This is something that I put more of a focus on in my S&C graduate program, but lateral movements are important. So side lunges, or if you're using sliders or bands, that you're jumping side to side with lateral movements. Functional body weight then is probably the last on this list. Spider push-ups, pull-ups, banded or full body weight. Great movements that you can include for strength and just improving performance. Again, if you can maneuver and move your body weight with push-ups and variations of push-ups, pull-ups, variations of squats and lunges, jumping lunges, etc., you're going to get a lot of benefit from that. Great movements that you can do that don't have a very long recovery time. So for example, depending on your time of the year, if you're doing, say, heavy lunges or heavy squats or heavy movement like that, you could be a week trying to recover from that. It's why I'd never have any of my players in the middle of a season maxing out in a workout, like going to 110% in a session, because the benefit, the risk to reward is too high or too low depending on your vantage point. Whereas in the off season you can do that. Worst case scenario is you're sore for a week and you recover and you're fine. You don't have any game coming up. But functional body weight, because you're able to increase the load, you're able to train hard, but the actual load on your body isn't massive in terms of the resistance. You're not doing it with weight. You're not doing jumping lunges with weight. You're not doing split squats with weight. You're not doing push-ups with 20 kilo vest on your back. All of these things will have a shorter recovery time, so you won't be sore for a week after. So they have a great time and a place. In my GAA Lean Body program, actually everybody that signs up to the program gets access to this, is the bodyweight S&C plan. I do it a lot with my younger athletes and those who are struggling for time or who are traveling for any period, for holiday, etc. And then they use that as kind of a stopgap in between gym sessions, and some people use it as their entire workout. But the reason it's so effective, paired with the running program and the plan, is because of the recovery. You're just not going to be as sore. Even if you're an absolute beginner, you won't be as sore for multiple days because the load is body weight versus extra resistance from weight. So there's some things to consider. Gone through a lot in that episode, so 24 minutes of just, this is exactly how you design your training program, what you need to do. So hopefully it helps. For those who want details on my GAA Lean Body program, either the upcoming one or whichever the next one is, depending on when you're listening, I'll put the link in the description below. That is everything from me from this week's episode. Catch you all next week.